Today I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and shall we say, the less than totally inspired. But not necessarily in that order. I will go ahead and kick things off with the good, and I've got to say that anything that comes in an IBM Personal System 2 box has got to be good. Let's take a closer look, shall we? This is an IBM Personal System 2 Model 50Z computer. It has been equipped with a Kingston SLC Now microprocessor upgrade, which would have certainly delivered a nice boost in performance, and it would have allowed the end user to run software requiring a 386 or 486 computer. However, it would not have given the performance, or even close to the performance, of a machine that was a true 386 or 486 right from the start. Now, this machine came from eBay, and these days IBM PS2s in good condition really don't show up on eBay very often at all. IBM made a lot of PS2s, but over time the supply of even popular mass-produced objects definitely dwindles, and so the number of machines today that show up in good condition is very few. It was fellow YouTuber Brian T333 that brought this machine to my attention. He sent me a message giving me the eBay item number and said it might interest me. Of course, he was right. Such things do interest me, and an amazing stroke of luck, I bid on the machine, and my proxy bid was set high enough that while there was one competing bid, I ended up with the system. Now, this system is unique not just because it's in good condition, but also because it belonged to its original owner, and the original owner had done a pretty good job of keeping all the stuff together with it. Now, I didn't get the IBM monitor or the Model M keyboard that came with this machine, but I definitely did get the original pointing device. Now, I call these a finger mouse just because of the basic shape. IBM had a later mouse that came out around the time of the PS1 and the Aptiva that was more a soap bar mouse. As far as this mouse goes, I'm aware of two major versions. This is the better of the two, if you ask me. This is the Japanese-made version. I don't know who makes this because the FCC ID on it is IBM's own, and I doubt very much that they built it, especially since it says manufactured for International Business Machines Corporation. But this mouse is nicer than the Taiwanese-made Logitech version, as it contains a rubber ball that features an encapsulated ball bearing, giving the mouse a very nice and heavy feel. This mouse also has better tactile feel to its click buttons. And electrically, this mouse seems to be a little bit more reliable than the Logitech one. I've seen a lot of the Logitech ones that had one or more worn-out click buttons. So what else came with this machine? Well, the original box, of course, in pretty good condition. It's got a little bit of writing on it, but not too much. For being basically 25 years old or thereabouts, it has survived very well over the course of the years. And of course, so has the system. There's just the slightest amount of grunge at the opening for the floppy drive, which is a very common problem with these. If the floppy drive doesn't have an electrical problem and it fails to work, you should definitely look inside it for dust bunnies or maybe even countless other objects. There's also just a tiny little bit of grunge around the power switch, but never mind that. Overall, this machine is very clean, and as I did mention, it came with a number of other accessories. Some of these things went with the Kingston microprocessor upgrade, and some of them were original to the machine. Now, if I can dump them out here without making a horrible mess out of everything, you'll see that we have the original System Quick Reference Guide, as well as the factory reference disk. There's a backup copy of the reference disk in here that contains the adapter definition files needed to configure this machine for the expansion cards that it has. It has only one expansion card, and that is a Kingston memory upgrade, the Kingston KTM 609/16 plus 2, which you might be able to see there on the screen. And then, of course, I also got the IBM Personal System 2 mouse program diskette, and finally, the instructions for the Kingston Technology SLC Now microprocessor upgrade and the Kingston memory expansion board. There's also the original 286 microprocessor still boxed up in an anti-static wrap, keeping it safely away from unfortunate zapping incidents. And then there is a Kingston PLCC chip puller This was used to remove the original 286 microprocessor without damaging it. This thing works very simply. A PLCC carrier typically has 2 notches at each side. You spread this tool apart, push it down into those notches, bring it together, and then you squeeze it, which causes these 2 hooks to pull up. When those hooks hit the bottom of the chip, you can gently rock the chip out of its socket, and then you can store it safely away and install your microprocessor upgrade. Then there is a rare sight indeed for any IBM PS2 collector, and that is the original set of system keys. Yes indeed, folks. This system has been very well preserved by its previous owner, who lived up in the Chicago suburbs. And that just about brings me to the less inspired point of things. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that the keys actually do operate this system's key lock, just so you can see what that looks like, because few people have ever had the good fortune to see an IBM Personal System 2 computer complete with its keys. Now I do need to find some slot blanks here. But now on to the less inspired part of things. I felt that it would be a good idea to protect this machine from the rigors of shipping, as well as the games that the shipping people sometimes play with the packages that have been entrusted to them. No offense to anyone in the shipping and package handling industries, of course, but sometimes these things happened. And so I made plans to go to Chicago, cash in hand, and acquire this machine in person from its previous owner. I also decided to take the Chevrolet Caprice wagon for a few different reasons, most notably the lack of wind noise that plagues my truck so badly. I also felt that the Caprice would probably manage to get better fuel economy than my pickup truck would, as there have been times that the Caprice has managed 25 to 27 miles per gallon out on the open road while running 70 to 75 miles an hour. Plus, what could possibly go wrong with a 20-year-old car that I have never driven more than 120 or so miles in a round trip? You think something could go wrong? No. Well, I'm pleased to say that nothing did go wrong with the car. However, there were definitely a few snags in Chicago, not the least of which was taking a 20-foot-long sofa of an automobile through rush hour traffic. I do not recommend doing something similar if you ever find yourself in that circumstance. There is definitely an argument to be made for driving a small econobox of a car through that sort of traffic. And on the way home, I definitely made a few wrong turns, but it was nothing I couldn't straighten out in relatively short order. However, by the time I got done with that, I was definitely in the mood to get home, and I drove accordingly, which probably did not help my fuel economy. Nevertheless, despite all that idling and the few wrong turns that I made and some time on a 2-lane highway, the old car managed a 22 mile per gallon on average level of fuel economy, and that is not too bad for such a big boat of an automobile. Plus, it was definitely very nice to ride in. Before I go ahead and tell you the bad part of this story, I'd like to point out an exceptional feature of the IBM Personal System 2 computer lineup. For those of you who are familiar with my videos or the IBM Personal System 2, you'll undoubtedly know what it is that I'm about to demonstrate. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the IBM Personal System 2 or who have just recently started watching my videos, well, the best way you can think of what you're about to see is toolless computer case design done right. And believe me when I say that the IBM Personal System 2 series is an outstanding example of this. To demonstrate, I'm going to take a few moments and disassemble this IBM PS2 Model 50Z. I'll go ahead and start with the 2 thumb screws on the back, which can typically be loosened by hand. Although these have a slot in them for a screwdriver blade, I don't recommend using a screwdriver with them, as it's all too easy to crank them down tightly enough to either crack the system's plastic rear plate or to actually pull the threaded insert out of the receiving hole in the case cover, and I've seen both of those things happen. So don't do that. Now, if the rear of the system happens to be locked, hopefully you've got the keys and can unlock it. Breaking into one of these systems might be a subject of a future video, but suffice it to say that for the Model 50 and 70 at least, it's possible to do that without inflicting gross damage on the case if you work carefully. As soon as you have the case unlocked and the 2 thumb screws undone, it's a simple matter of pulling the case cover forward and off, although it might stick a little bit, as you can see it's wanting to do here. But as soon as you have it free, you can simply set it on the floor And I definitely recommend, especially if you're shooting a video about how to disassemble an IBM Personal System 2, that you set the top case cover out of the path of traffic, lest you end up looking like a big dum-dum on camera when you trip over it. And believe me, I don't need any help looking like a big dum-dum on camera. However, good toolless case design is more than just skin deep. A lot of computer cases make it easy to take the cover off, but then you find that working on something else inside of them is really a pretty huge chore. Not so with the IBM Personal System 2 series. I'll go ahead and remove the disk drive here. As you can see, there's just a latch on the bottom that allows it to slide free of the system chassis. And as far as the chassis is concerned, some of you may very well have noticed this white part that was attached to the keys. Normally this lives underneath the system beeper, but for some reason the previous owner decided that it would be a good idea to attach this to the system keyring. It's finally time to remove the system chassis from the case, and that is the purpose of this special tool that ordinarily lives below the speaker. However, before we do this, a word of warning. If you have an early model 70 or an early model 50, that is to say a model 50 without the Z, removing the chassis from the system will result in the loss of your system configuration as well as the time and date settings, as you will be unplugging an edge card connector that provides battery power to the system's planar board. So before you do this, make sure that you have your system's reference disk and all the adapter definition files you need. If you don't have those things, you may really want to think twice about that. Now, in the case of the later model 70s and the 50Z, the board is actually connected to the battery via a wire pigtail, and so loss of the configuration is not as common of a problem, but it can still happen. So perhaps it's a good idea to just make sure that you've got everything you need to reconfigure the machine before you go so far as to take anything apart. You place this tool under each of the snaps in the system chassis, and then you simply press down. Now if the snaps aren't broken, and some of them are on this system, like that one right there, you will hear a click as the clips release from the base system assembly. Some of them are a little bit fiddly. There's one over here under the speaker and the battery. I think there's also one directly behind the floppy disk connection riser. There's two on the system fan. And then there are two more in the back of the system here. And once you have those loose, it's possible to take this chassis and lift it right out of the system. You're supposed to lift the fan out separately, but oftentimes I do it just as one assembly. And then you can see the entire system board and the base plate of the computer. You can also see the power supply assembly. At long last, it's time for the bad news part of the video. Every now and again, someone will appear on one of my videos in the comments area and they'll say something to the effect of, well, why do you play with old computers? Old computers aren't very interesting. I have a hard time understanding that school of thought because I like playing with old computers, and they definitely have their moments where they can really get your heart beating, such as this one did not long before I shot this video. As I was getting everything ready, I turned this system on just to make sure that everything was in working order for the demonstration part. And not even 1 second later, there was a heck of a bang and a huge flash. I don't know if I said any bad words or not. Frankly, I think I was too shocked to say any bad words. Because when a computer emits a bang and a flash like that, you can't help but know that something has gone horribly wrong. Fortunately, in this case, it was nothing too serious, but I'll tell you what, it certainly got my heart beating. You see, over here by the power supply input connector, there are a couple of little old tantalum capacitors. Now, tantalum capacitors, after a number of years, can become known as tantrum capacitors because they can fail. Sometimes they can fail violently. I've seen them start smoking, but I'd never seen one that just outright blew up like the one that used to be at position C23 on this board. It left little orange pieces of tantalum capacitor all over the inside of the system. It's probably very fortunate that I wasn't standing right over it, or I might have gotten an eyeful. And as you can see, it blew that sucker clean off the motherboard. I would imagine that what happened is very simple. Even though this is a very small power supply at 94 total watts of output, it probably had more than enough strength on whatever rails that tantalum capacitor was connected to. And when that thing shorted out, I doubt the power supply ever even noticed that it was driving a short circuit, and it was no doubt capable of putting out sufficient current to blow that thing sky high. And indeed, it did. These are just some of the pieces that I managed to find inside the system. However, you can definitely be assured that I took it apart and shook it out carefully, just in case there were any more of these lurking inside to cause trouble. This is the biggest piece of it right here. You can see the legs that formerly attached it to the planar board, and you can also see how the top just absolutely blew out of it. And then, of course, there are two little fragments down there. So that, well, that was certainly exciting. But back to the good news. Although that capacitor will need to be replaced, and I'll have to find a suitable replacement for it because I'm honestly not familiar with three-legged capacitors such as those, I should be able to find one somewhere, and the system is still running perfectly well. Reassembly of the system is pretty much the opposite of disassembly. When you go to set the chassis back in place, make sure that all these little pins and clips are going into their respective holes. Also, if you have an early model 50 or early model 70, make sure that the edge card connector for the system speaker and the battery has gone back into its connection on the planar board. Once you have done that, it's a simple matter of pushing all these snaps down with your fingers until they click, making sure that you get all of them. If some of them seem especially stubborn, make sure that everything is fitting into the right place. Then you can start reinserting things like the micro-channel expansion cards. I just reinstalled the memory card right there. Now I'm going to reinstall the hard drive riser bridge, followed by the hard drive itself. And again, this takes a little bit of doing because these clips, they hold on to the drive pretty tightly, and you want to make sure that all that stuff is connected plenty well so that you don't have some kind of data error. And then it's time for the system fan, which simply slides in at the back of the chassis. The Model 70 hasn't got one of these. Its fan is mounted directly to the power supply, which makes sense when you consider that it has a 132 watt power supply instead of a small 94 watt power supply such as this. My knowledge of these machines is limited to the variants offered on the US and Canadian market, but in the case of the PS2 models 50 and 70, I've only ever seen power supplies sourced from two manufacturers and used by IBM in these machines. The first is present in this machine. This power supply was manufactured by Zenith Electronics, formerly Zenith Radio Corporation. Yes, the same Zenith that manufactured televisions and radios once upon a time. Although it has no outward indication as to its manufacturer, the circuit boards are marked internally with either copyrights for Zenith Radio or Zenith Electronics Corporation, depending upon the age of the unit. You can also see a sticker that says the supply was made in Mexico. I've never seen the Zenith supply indicated as being manufactured anywhere else. Internally, the Zenith supply has an awful lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of components in there. The other power supply manufacturer is Aztec Custom Power, and as you can see, their logo does appear on this power supply. Internally, this power supply is much less complex than the one from Zenith. However, both of them are operating under fairly heavy loads, especially for the smaller 94 watt model that is used in the Model 50. It's rumored that that power supply actually can't quite meet its rating. And I have seen evidence in the Aztec supply of the start of heat damage. In particular, there are two large ceramic resistors on the board that I have seen get so hot that the circuit traces connecting them to everything else actually started to disintegrate. Now, IBM did not want people getting into these power supplies, and for very good reason, so they used security Torx screws to keep people out of them. Another common problem with this power supply that I have seen is failure of the power switch or breakage. I don't know where you could get a replacement, but if you come across a supply that seems to be dead and you're capable of working safely inside one of these things, as they can be quite nasty, by all means it pays to look for heat-stressed components and a defective power switch. Speaking of power, let's go ahead and fire this thing up. I really hope that's not in the literal sense either. Got everything hooked up here and ready to go. Model M keyboard, which did not come with the computer. I did not get one of those with it. The mouse, and of course the lovely Hewlett-Packard VGA monitor. So cover your ears. and still smell that burned silicon-y like smell. Burnt electronic components have such a distinctive aroma to them. It's something you will truly not forget, because it really drives home the message that something has gone horrifically, irretrievably wrong, and the delicate magic smoke that makes everything work has been irretrievably jarred loose. It's actually going up and counting the memory that is installed on the expansion card right now, and at that point the system will go ahead and boot. It is presently running MS-DOS 6.22 and Windows 3.1. I have plans in future, once this system is fully repaired, to go ahead and install some different software on it and upgrade the hardware in various different ways, and I will most certainly be making videos on that subject when the time comes. It has about 5 megabytes of memory installed on it, 4 on the card and 1 on the system board, which was a pretty common layout for these. You can hear that wonderful chattery hard drive as the system goes ahead and boots up. There's really not much in the way of software on this machine right now. Of course, with a 30 megabyte hard drive in it, there just wouldn't be room for very much. I'm on the fence about upgrading the hard drive, to be honest. On the one hand, it'd be nice to have the increased reliability and storage space. On the other hand, to start changing around a nice, original, unspoiled example of a system such as this one, of which I'm only the second owner, it'd be kind of unfortunate, I think. I'm definitely on the fence about that a little bit. But here we are coming into Windows 3.1 right now. And it moves along at an okay rate of speed, but you can definitely tell that it's nobody's idea of a speed demon. Go ahead and just see how well the mouse works here. It looks like it's got dirty rollers inside it because it's not tracking very well at the moment. We'll just try going into the file manager. The click buttons are working well on it. A couple of IBM PS2 related things right there, including some interesting documentation that I plan to move off of this machine and save a copy of. But I'll do that at some later time. For right now, it's time to call this video quits. Go ahead and exit Windows here, and after just a moment this system will be ready to shut down. The pause when you exit Windows is caused by initialization of the PS2 mouse port when Windows exits, and on some of these machines the pause can be quite substantial. Fortunately, there is a setting that can be changed to prevent that problem, and I might be talking about that in the future. You can also see that the MS-DOS prompt on this machine has been slightly customized from the usual. Thank you for watching, and feel free to leave a comment if you have one.